I would say he brings a lot of practical knowledge. He's seen the development of soccer players from very young ages all the way to professional ages. So he has a lot of insight on what it looks like. And I think really his biggest benefit to all of us is he can connect the medical side to the soccer side. So without any further delay, I'd like to introduce Dr. William Curtis. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Well, thank you, Sebastian. And as he mentioned, I've worked a long time with Sebastian. I think you guys are in for a big treat working with Sebastian. I've started with him many years ago with my kids, and I can tell you, taking them through his program and his philosophy, which now I would consider my philosophy as well, has been a very powerful experience for my kids that have come through the youth ranks all the way up into college level soccer. It's been an experience and an honor working with him. Tonight, I want to, as most of my talks, if I get the opportunity to meet with you again in the future, one of the things you're going to notice about me is I try to bring everything, make it very clear and practical. My talks are not extremely long-winded in most situations, and I try to make them something that you can take away with you and you can apply. And most of what I will always tell you will have some type of science or at least practical experience that I've applied either with our youth athletes or professional athletes that we've worked with. And as a little bit of background so you understand, I am a medical doctor. I'm board certified in family medicine by trade. If you go back a little bit further, I was also an athlete growing up. I played a lot of soccer. I see a lot of kids in the age group that I played soccer as well. When I got on into high school and college, I ran track and played football. And then as I got into college, I was a Division I sprinter for Baylor University. Ran with professional athletes, people you might recognize if you've ever watched the Olympics, like Michael Johnson, Raymond Pierre, and some of these world-class sprinters that have set all kinds of records over the years. So, and then as I've got into my professional career, I've worked with athletes on and off in a medical capacity, and then of course as a coaching in a coaching capacity. And it's always a pleasure to work with healthy people. But I spend a lot of my time and a lot of my passion working with people trying to reverse disease. And with athletes, I try to encourage the highest level of performance they can. I do that through emphasizing nutrition and proper lifestyle. There is no health in a bottle for the most part. And for what we need to do as athletes to get the maximum benefit of our genetics and our abilities is we need to make sure that we feed and fuel the body properly. So today I'm going to have a very practical talk, and some of it's going to seem really simple, but I'll definitely hammer home a few of the points with practical experience that we've had, and then I'll leave a little bit of time towards the end where I'll be happy to take questions. The first thing I want to do is I want to talk about nutrition, performance nutrition in particular. What do you have to do, eat, consume to get the best performance as an athlete? Because quite frankly, the games are won and lost often before you even step on the field. It's what you eat and drink that matters the most. And I know some of you younger players there, maybe your parents have said this and maybe it makes sense, but maybe coming from mom or dad, it doesn't always seem to make, like it doesn't sound like a good idea coming from them. But let me tell you that is a hugely important topic. What you eat matters. The first big thing I want to go over is the main 4 things you want to stay away from. These are things that are absolute performance killers. They also happen to be things that cause diseases as people get older. And for an aspiring athlete, these things will actually rob your performance. It'll make you run slower. You'll have more problems, recovering from your events. There's all kinds of reasons nutrition is super important. And much like a race car, one of my other side hobbies is I race cars, and you would never put bad fuel in your car. If you do, your car breaks down and you don't go very fast. So it's the same thing for an athlete like you guys. The first thing I want to talk about is the things you should not eat. These should be eaten extremely sparingly, if ever. Now, perfection's not the goal, but the idea is these are foods you should not eat because they will rob your performance as an athlete. So I call them the big 4. The first one is alcohol. Now, a lot of you are a lot younger, and that seems like, okay, that's crazy talk. Nobody would drink alcohol, right? But I know that when kids are getting into middle school and into high school, alcohol sometimes becomes an issue, even with athletes. So I want you to understand that alcohol, beer, wine, soda, beer, wine, and mixed drinks, things like that, definitely rob performance. Okay, so for this group, I know that's not as much of a big deal, but for the older athletes and certainly some of the professional athletes I've worked with, alcohol is something that robs performance. The second one, and this is a big one, sodas. This includes diet sodas and even clear sodas. Sometimes people think like, oh, Sprite, that's not really, it doesn't really count. It does count. Okay. Sodas are absolutely terrible for you. They're terrible for your hydration, which we'll talk about in a little bit. They're also terrible for as a source of energy. They actually rob your energy. They also dehydrate you, and the caffeine that's in them can cause problems as well. Also, some of you, even parents, maybe like diet sodas. One of the problems with diet sodas is they typically are sweetened with something called aspartame. It's been shown to be more addicting than crack cocaine in lab animals. And it's also been shown to be neurotoxic in humans. Yet it's still considered something that's, quote, safe, according to the FDA, even though there's research that shows this. And I think there's very good evidence that it also causes attention deficit and other problems related to mental focus. So if you've got an athlete or you're an athlete that struggles paying attention, maybe having struggling in school, and you tend to have diet sodas or things like that, this is not something you want to do. You want to have maximum performance as an athlete. Sodas are not it. I often tell my diabetic patients and my patients with disease that are related to eating sugar, I tell them that sodas are death in a can. And I would tell you that definitely besides performance, they're still death in a can even for young athletes. Do not drink them. They're bad for you. The third one is energy drinks. Now, I know that a lot of parents in the age group I'm seeing here keep their kids away from these, but be careful of caffeine-laden drinks, Monster drinks, Red Bulls, things like that. They really, the caffeine that's in them does have some research that shows it can be performance boosting in some capacity, but there's a lot of negatives to energy drinks. And so you should be very careful with those. They can cause cardiac arrhythmias, and there actually have been people that have died from drinking things like 5-Hour Energy and some of these types of things. Not, most people consume them and they do okay, but they actually do cause cardiac issues. They raise your heart rate, and then they can affect performance, especially in events or sports like soccer, where it's a high amount of anaerobic and aerobic mixture of running. You need your heart rate to be as low as it can be, except for when you need that burst of speed or stamina to run down the field. You don't want your heart rate to be artificially elevated by these types of things. The next and final of the big four is processed or sugar-laden foods. Okay, this can be things, think about things like candy, pastries, pies, cakes, donuts, these and fast food for that matter. These are foods that are very high in sugar, or or another term for that would be a carbohydrate. Sugar is a source of fuel for the body. But the problem with highly processed foods is there's a lot of negatives to consuming foods that are very dense in sugar. And a lot of people think, well, I should eat something like sugar before a big event so I'll have energy. Well, the problem with that is it's an energy that's very short-lived. And what happens is the energy spikes and then crashes very violently. So sometimes people can eat some, like, let's say you eat a, pancake breakfast before the big soccer match at 10 a.m. You might actually feel really jazzed at the beginning of the game. And then you get halfway through the game, or maybe not even to halftime, and the player will notice a big crash in energy and performance. And that is driven by the fact that they're eating a simple, highly processed sugar. Now, going through those in a little bit more detail, these big four also have a few other things. I mentioned that for all four of these, this would be true. They all decrease mental focus. They also affect sleep, and in many of them can cause improper digestion. So improper digestion can mean bloating, gassiness. It can mean that you don't absorb the good vitamins and minerals that should be in your food. And this is a problem for an athlete that's trying to repair or stave off injury or recuperate between training sessions. Another thing that happens is, especially as these athletes get older, if they start accumulating fat, body fat in the midsection, down around the belly, or excessive fat on their bodies, this is a sign of high insulin. Insulin is a hormone that is driven by eating sugar. And when we eat that, we tend to put on weight. It's a hormone that tells our body to store fat. And when you store fat, you're carrying more weight, even though you're in the same body, but and you still have to run the same distance as everyone else, and you have to be able to jump and run fast, but you're carrying more weight than you have to because of the foods that you consume. So that's a big reason, and it can definitely affect your stamina for that reason. I mentioned digestion already. Poor digestion is a huge problem. If any of you athletes have asthma, allergies, tendencies towards digestive problems, you really need to start looking at things like sugar and some of these big four no-nos, because poor digestion is a sign that you can't bring nutrients into your body properly. You don't digest your food right. You don't have good energy. You don't repair well. So it's another big reason I like to mention that. The last thing about these foods is they all have the tendency to cause inflammation. Has anyone in this event ever, ran a lot and their muscles are really sore, or maybe they strained a wrist or a knee or something and it was sore for a couple of days? Anybody like that? Well, basically, anytime you have soreness like that, that's called inflammation, and it's the body's natural way to heal itself. The problem with inflammation is that certain foods can cause you to have inflammation, and they can cause you to not heal inflammation fast enough. So let's say your coach or your trainer, like Sebastian, pushes you through a really tough workout, and you're so tired and you're so sore that the next morning you get up, you can barely move around because you're so tired. Or maybe you have a game that's back to back to back. Whenever you get to that next game, you might find that your joints are sore, your back is sore, your muscles are sore. When you eat the wrong foods, like some of these big fours, especially processed sugars or sodas, that inflammation will have trouble going away. If you're one of the parents listening and you think you're getting old because you have achiness and things like that, but you have these in your diet, I challenge you, try getting them out of your diet for a while. You'd be surprised how much inflammation goes away. Food can cause inflammation. Food can retard your ability to eliminate inflammation. So it's a big part of athlete recovery. I'll throw a plug in for one of my podcasts that I do that Sebastian has been on as a guest, the WFO Life podcast. We did an interview with 5-time Olympic high jumper Amy Acuff about 6 months ago. She had a 24-year career, 24 years as an Olympic high jumper, and 5 Olympic trials. This athlete, it was an awesome interview because she talked in detail about her training and how she treated her body, how she prepared, and also how nutrition played a huge role in her ability to stay injury-free or competitive for 24 years as an adult athlete. That's amazing. And for parents that have been athletes before, they know how amazing that must be to compete at that level. So as I mentioned, a race car driver wants, if you want a fast car, you got to have the right fuel. You don't want to have the wrong fuel. And as attractive as some of these foods are, I mean, let's face it, sugar is addicting. The body, human beings were built to crave sugar. There's a reason for it. I'm not going to go into it, but we do crave these things. But we have to be careful eating things that really aren't food, and things that fall into these big four: the alcohol, the sodas, the excess processed sugar, and energy drinks. Stay away from these things and you'll have better performance. So I'm going to move on from there. And again, I'll leave a little time for questions at the end, but these were the things you should try to avoid. Perfection isn't the goal, but if you're top level, you're trying to be a top level athlete, you want to make the team or make the top team, you want to move on and play at the highest level, you have to start looking at these foods and say, those are just things I don't do because I'm a high performance athlete. Okay. So I want to move on briefly and talk about nutritional standards for athletes. These are things that, generally speaking, I want you to do. These are things I want you to incorporate in your lifestyle and your diet and your performance, eating. First thing I want you to think about is you always want to choose real food when you can, right? That may seem like a funny thing to say, but real food, what does that mean? Real food are things you can hunt, gather, or get in nature normally, okay? The real foods would be things like fruits, vegetables, meat, eggs, nuts, seeds, things you can look at and you recognize as food. Generally, it's the outer perimeter of the grocery store, not the inside of the store. See, the outside, right? Vegetables, meat section, dairy section, things like that. Athletes should strive to eat foods they recognize as food, Okay. So an apple, meat, an egg, these are primary food types. When you look at things that are in a box, packaged foods, fast food, processed chemically laden foods that have lots of ingredients. You ever got one of those boxes and like look at the back and you don't even know, you can't pronounce some of those things? Those are things, if you don't understand the name on the back, you probably shouldn't eat it. Okay. And that's really important. And I hate to break it to everyone, but Cheetos and Takis are not food. Okay. Everybody just checks out now. That's it. We're done.
A lot of souls out here.
Yeah, we broke a lot of souls there. So the same goes for sodas and energy drinks and boosters and stimulants and powders and shakes. Sticking with natural food sources will enhance your nutrition, your mineral and vitamin absorption. And as I mentioned in the other section, digestion is huge. And guess what? A better digestion and eating real foods will boost your immunity, and it helps your injury repair, and it helps you with inflammation control. Man, what athlete doesn't need all of that? And who wants to have a good immune system right now? I do. I don't want COVID-19, right? I want to be a strong, healthy human being. To do that, I need a good immune system. Ideally, eat the highest quality food you can find or your parents can provide. Eat food that has natural seasoning on it, like salt and pepper and herbs. Try to stay away from stuff that's got a lot of sugar in it or sauces that are sweetened or have a lot of chemicals in them. And ideally, eat food that's been personally prepared. You know, as a family, eat meals together. Usually, families are much healthier. I've noticed a lot of my patients, this is anecdotal, but my patients that I've been seeing in clinic since the COVID-19 quarantine situation, a lot of people have lost weight and they're eating better because they're eating more meals at home. That's because the food you eat at fast food restaurants has chemicals, has a lot of carbohydrates, and it has a lot of sugar in it and things that cause us to gain weight and feel bad and have inflammation. So an ideal meal, let's talk about for an athlete, what an ideal meal might look like. It has three major things: protein, good fats, and typically some form of carbohydrates, but I'll be specific about that. Proteins are basically things like meat, and it's important for muscle repair and all kinds of different activities in the body. For an athlete, proteins provide primary vitamins and nutrients. And these can be things like fish, chicken, turkey, beef, pork, and other wild game. It can be nuts, walnuts, macadamia nuts, cashews, almonds, seeds, and some plants. And yes, protein powders have protein, but real food is always best. So I'm not going to knock if you want to have a protein shake of some sort at times, but I'm just going to tell you that real food sources of protein are always best. The next major category, and this one sometimes people think is controversial, is fat. Good fat. Yes, there is such a thing as a good fat. A huge portion of essential vitamins and nutrients come from vitamins that we find in fat. Okay. Fat doesn't make you fat, by the way. There's plenty of evidence in medical research that shows that's true. However, we're talking about good fats. We're talking about avocados, nuts, seeds, eggs, heavy cream, butter, coconut oil, olive oil, even something called hump oil, which is actually not it's made from the hump of a camel. Apparently, it's one of the highest forms of high quality fat. These foods help you nourish your immune system and your nervous system. By the way, I often emphasize fat intake for athletes and also for people that are having attention and focus problems, especially students, young students in school. If they're being told, oh, they're hyperactive, things like that, often you can raise fat content in the diet and these good fats, and they do better. These foods also, without good fats, players tend to be irritable, moody, fatigued. They tend to sleep poorly, and immune function can definitely decline. There is such a thing called an essential fatty acid. That's a term we use in medicine that means it's absolutely essential to life. So fats are essential. I just mentioned some of the ones that are good. They should be a part of your diet. The last one is carbohydrates, and I want to be careful with these. Carbohydrates are simple sugars, and we just talked about sugars, but I was talking about the bad ones, the very high sugar foods. The best type of carbohydrates, which are sources of quick energy, come from things like vegetables, like lettuce, broccoli, spinach, kale, carrots, beets, asparagus, onions, things like that. Now, I probably lost 5 or 6 more people here saying that when talking about vegetables, but the reality is they are good for you, and they don't spike your insulin like we talked about, and they don't cause inflammation. In fact, many of them have vitamins and minerals in them that decrease inflammation and are necessary. Fruits are also considered a complex carbohydrate, and fruits can be good for an athlete, but they should be used or eaten in their whole form. Fruit juice is not a health food, okay? If you're going to have something that's a fruit, have an apple, an orange, blueberries, blackberries, strawberries, raspberries. These tend to be very high in nutrients, but very low in processed sugar, or high in, or low in sugar. And they also tend to not cause as much inflammation as other types. Now, the flip side of this, breads, pasta, cereal, crackers, cakes, pastries, these are also carbohydrates. These types of foods are not as helpful for an athlete. These are carbs that should be minimized. And mainly, if you're going to eat them, stick with sprouted grains, vegetables, or fruit as your choices. So it's think fruit, vegetables, meat, and good fats. Think about those. Every meal should look like that. Okay? I'm not going to go into dairy and some of these other things. If somebody wants to ask about those kind of things, you can either do that at the end of this talk, or we can do that offline in my information hub. We can talk about that later on. But there are other food types, but these are the big ones. These are the ones that matter for an athlete. And if you're going to eat carbohydrates, the best time, if you're trying to be a lean, well, a fit athlete, carbohydrates are generally best after exercise. I'm not one that teaches a lot of carbohydrate loading the night before games, and there's reasons for that, which is beyond the scope of this talk. But if you are going to eat carbohydrates as an adult or as an athlete, as a young athlete, consider eating them mostly immediately within an hour after a major, like say a training session or after a game. I think that's important. So I see I'm about 20 minutes in or so. So I'm going to go through one section on what I think is important on hydration, and then I'm going to leave room for some questions and that type of thing. There is more in some of the information that I've provided to the club, and I'll make sure that you have a way to access some of that information, but I don't want to overwhelm you. Like I said, I want to make it clean and simple. We've talked about 4 things that you shouldn't eat, when we've talked about the big picture things that should be in your diet. Very simple. The next section I want to talk about is hydration. This is something that I have, with Sebastian, we have put to the test with some athletes and other clubs we've coached for, and it's something that there's a lot of research behind. People hear, oh, okay, hydration, I got to drink water, right? Yeah, okay. Yes, but it's more detailed than that. The science of hydration in the human body, we're like 70% water. The human body is 70% water. And when we have minor fluctuations in water in our body, say we get a little, we don't drink enough, put it that way, what ends up happening is it actually causes us problems, okay? So in soccer training, research has shown that the lack of proper hydration leads to decreased stamina. That means your ability to run up and down the field effectively, strength, your ability to, and even your skill on game day. They have done studies in South American, probably Colombians, soccer players, where these were professional level athletes, and these athletes were they drew blood and took urine samples from them before games to test how well and how much hydration they had, how much water they had in their body. What they showed is that even elite athletes, the top level professional athletes, many of them begin a match or training sessions dehydrated, not enough water in their body. And not only that, after the game, they only recover about 50% of the losses during the game immediately before their next training session. So what this means is, what do you think the possibility of your player, your young athlete, or you as a player, what do you think the possibility is that you play one game or do a training session on Thursday, don't really drink enough water, and you show up Saturday morning to play a club match, and you're dehydrated? And we just said dehydration can cause you to run slower, not kick the ball, and have as good a skill, and not have as much strength. What do you think that's going to do to the outcome of your performance or even your team performance? It's going to be a problem. And this is based in hard science, studying professional athletes. Hydration matters. So here's a few facts about this. Players often begin matches underhydrated. Players often rehydrate slower and less completely during and after match play. 1 to 2% weight water loss during a match or training can cause significant impairments in athletic performance. That isn't much. I promise you, if you get a heavy sweat going during a soccer match, I guarantee you're at least at 1%. Okay? and it's difficult to push it back in. The other thing that's interesting about water is that everyone sweats differently, and that varies between players. So maybe if there's coaches listening, you might have players that sweat much more heavily than others. And that can make it very difficult to deter how much each player needs hydration wise. But we have to individualize that, and we have to learn as a player and as a parent helping their player, we have to learn which players are going to require more hydration in advance. So I want to also talk about a couple of the performance breakdowns that occur. This often, I've seen this happen. Sebastian and I have good experience using these, seeing this happen, this hydration issue happen in tournaments. Anybody ever went to a tournament where you had to play 3 or 4 games in like 3 days, like maybe the Austin Labor Day tournament or something like that, where it's 110 degrees and everybody's dying on the field? Everybody plays awesome the first game. The first game's like death match, right? Everybody's on the field. It's high noon and it's 105 degrees. Everybody plays lights out. And then they all go home and we go to, we all scatter for a few hours. We go to Jason's Deli or something, and we come back in the next game. Everybody plays different. Everybody seems tired. The star player can't dribble as well as they used to. We don't score as many goals. It happens. We've seen it happen over and over. And as that weekend goes on, the games get sloppier and sloppier. And sometimes we even see injuries. And we see players that because they're tired and they don't have as good a coordination, they get injuries. Well, that's what the research shows about hydration. In particular, when a player is dehydrated, they have less focus, decreased stamina. They have less drive and motivation. I've seen parents screaming from the other sideline, "You little, Timmy's got to run harder. What's wrong with you?" And they're screaming all these things like, "You're not trying hard enough." And the reality is this kid's in a fog because he's dehydrated. And he can't run as fast as he did the day before because his muscles are all wiped out and his nervous system is wiped out. This is what happens with dehydration. And we're blaming it on them. They're not trying hard enough. Well, the reality is their brain is not getting enough hydration, and they're not motivated as much. They don't want it as much. Why? Because their brain is cooked from not enough hydration. Also, technical skills drop off. So dribbling, passing, receiving, all these technical things that are so important and are going to be super important in a possession style club, these things deteriorate as dehydration ensues. So you got a decline in physical ability, thinking ability. I would argue, and I think I've seen this evident in my years of coaching, that concussions, injuries, collisions with other players, all of these things become, I think, higher risk in a player who's not hydrated well. So I think I've beat that up, and I'm going to leave in the notes here that you'll have access to. I'm going to talk a little bit about things that you may want to consider right now, and then I'm going to leave a whole section that you can come back to the information and read about actual protocols that Sebastian and I have used with teams that had less than 14 players playing in major tournaments, winning those tournaments, winning state championships against teams that far outmatched us as far as number of players. But we use these hydration protocols aggressively during tournaments, and it made a huge difference. It made a massive difference. Our players, that even though they were playing more minutes than everybody else we played, they were doing very well because they were hydrated, and we kept them that way as best we could according to what the science says. I'm going to leave that for something you guys can read on our community site. So, suggested hydration regimen: 24 to 48 hours prior to a game or match. Drink 1 to 2 liters of water. Consume it gradually all day. I will leave you with the thought that top athletes always have a bottle of water with them. Always. You should walk around, and if you can get away with this in school, walk around with a water bottle, sipping it all the time. Because what are you going to be doing? You're going to be training all week. And we just said that you got to stay hydrated. And to do that, you can't just guzzle it all once and slosh around all day. That doesn't work. You have to sip it and let it get into your tissues and into your body. Top athletes carry water bottles constantly. You must pre-hydrate before matches, and that starts 24 to 48 hours before. 4 hours prior to a game or match, I would drink some type of electrolyte solution. This might be 8 to 16 ounces of Gatorade, or preferably the lower sugar version, G2. And if you would like to stay away from the things that have artificial sweeteners in them, you can try pulp-free coconut water. Okay? Coconut water has electrolytes, and it works very similar to Gatorade. It just tastes a little different. It doesn't have as much sugar. During the match or during halftime or breaks, I tend to ask players to do electrolyte solutions. So that's Gatorade or coconut water, or if you have to, water. But you don't want to guzzle that. You want to sip it. Otherwise, you get bloated during your training. But you do want to sip it. It will make a difference as the game progresses, especially during tournaments. That makes a big difference in tournaments. Often, I think it's a tip, if you do Gatorade during a halftime, always wash a little water down after. The Gatorade tends to leave a sticky film in the mouth. And I think if it's really hot, I think swishing a little bit of water makes sense. After hydration, and this is immediately, and if you have a player that you know just trained really hard, you try to put this in their face. This is something they should do right away. 8 to 16 ounces, or even as high as 32 ounces of water, and maybe 8 ounces of Gatorade should be tried to push in fairly quickly, especially if they were sweating very heavily. The right after is super important because it takes so long for the hydration to get into the system. Remember what I mentioned about the professional players. If you don't start that immediately, especially in match or tournament play, you're going to have a 50% loss that's not going to come. It's not going to, you're not going to recover as fast between games. Time matters with hydration. So lack of planning and attention to hydration pre and post game can play a huge role in performance, recovery. There's a ton of opinions on this topic, but I think it often gets overlooked. This is something that people hear, oh yeah, you should be hydrated. You should, the coach will say it as you're leaving, hydrate up. No. It's much more specific than that. I know with Sebastian and I, we had whole programs with our professional athletes where, man, it was like business. These guys better be doing this. And it made a difference between whether they came out at the 75th minute or they played all 90 minutes. If they can't go because they didn't prepare properly, either through their nutrition or through their hydration, it makes a difference. And it will for you as young players as well. I think I want to hold there. And I want to go ahead and I think that's a nice timeline. And I want to make sure if anybody has any burning questions, I want you to ask those now, and I'll hang on and take as many as you need. I also am going to invite you. There is a link I think they put in the notes somewhere to a little forum that has all of these things I've talked about in a written format, and then we're going to have a replay of this video should you want to hear it again. That format, it's like a community. So if you have a question, you'll see me there. Just ask a question, even if it's next week or whatever. I'll be happy to point you in the right direction, or if I don't know the answer, I'll get somebody who does. So I'm committed to helping you guys as a club, and I'd like to see you all have success. So I'm going to pause there on the whole performance, nutrition, and hydration topics. I hope some of that sunk in for some of you, and I hope there's something in there that helps one or two of you improve your game and your recovery. So I'll pause there and leave it to Sebastian and Brianna.
Awesome, thank you. So just to circle back around to the link that you're referring to, it is on our website, and I put our website link with the club events. So if you guys want to check out this recording, I'll post it later on this evening. And then if you want to reach out to Dr. Curtis as well, you have his information on there. A few questions in the chat section. We'll start from the top a little early on. Sebastian asked, what about coffee? Is there a certain way that, or should you consume it? Should you not?
So for the older athletes that might drink coffee, I'm okay with coffee. There is research that caffeine can be a performance enhancer, but the problem with caffeine is for every cup of coffee you drink, you probably ought to plan on at least an extra glass of water to go with it if you're a competitive athlete. The reason is caffeine will draw water out of the body a little bit. So on one hand, it does stimulate the nervous system. It does have some performance and focus things that it does help the athlete. But in too much, like we talked about with monster drinks and sodas and things like that, what happens is it can actually change how your heart beats and heart rate, some of these kind of things. So it can be something that can affect your performance. A little bit is fine. Just be aware that you probably have to compensate hydration-wise for drinking something that's got caffeine like coffee in it. Also, I'm not talking about double, espresso frappuccinos and, pumpkin spice lattes. Isn't that your favorite? But yeah, I'm not talking about that because those have so much sugar in them. You might as well drink a Coke and, put yourself out of your misery.
Good, thank you for the clarification. Right. Another question, we have is, can you have a soda every once in a while? And just to follow up on that question, is there an alternative that you recommend? Maybe like sparkling waters or just something similar?
So I'm going to draw the hard line. If you're an athlete and you're serious about what you do, why don't you just forget about sodas? Why don't you just realize they're death in a can? So I'll just leave it at that. Now, what do I drink? Topo Chico. There's all kinds of things like LaCroix, which is a sparkling water. It's infused with fruit. It does not have artificial sweeteners. It has no sugar. It is not a soda, but it's kind of feels like something kind of dangerous because it has a little, fizz to it and everything. But the reality, there's all kinds of those types of things. I'm okay with some tea, but it kind of falls into the same place as coffee. You want to be careful with that and don't load up your tea with all kinds of sugar. So I tend to tell people water, tea, coffee, herbal teas are okay. And, you can also squeeze lime or lemon in your water. Or if you like something that's got a little flavor to it, think about LaCroix, think about Topo Chicos, and things like that, because these are things that kind of seem like a treat and they can be kind of, spiced up in different ways, but they really aren't bad for you. So don't do the sodas.
No sodas. Sorry to ruin it for you guys.
Yeah.
On the similar topic, what about energy bars? Are there maybe any alternatives that you recommend? I'm a fan of RX bars, but I don't know your opinion on those, or what's your take?
There's a ton of bars out there. Lara bars aren't too bad. Go for the ones that have very high quality nutrients. Stay away from the ones that have greater than 15 grams of carbohydrates in them, sugar carbs. If they're super sweet, it's probably because they're closer to eating a candy bar. Look for the ones that are very high in protein, natural ingredients, and typically less than about 15 grams of carbohydrates per bar. Okay, so be careful with those. There's a lot of ones, they don't taste as good as some of the sweet ones that you get in the convenience stores and stuff. The ones in the convenience stores, by the way, man, stay away from those. A lot of them are not good for you.
Awesome. And then one more question. What can we consume to stay mentally sharp, especially late in games?
So a couple of things. First off, that's kind of why I mentioned hydration. Hydration is one thing that you will see a drop off in mental capacity and focus. And that can be the primary reason for that drop off in mental focus. Okay. Also, the performance killers that we talked about, those things, that's why sometimes you will see a drop off in performance in the midst of a game, is if somebody is having a crash of energy because of what they consumed 4 to 6 hours earlier, or what their typical diet is. Your typical diet is very high in processed junk, fast food, or processed carbohydrates. You will have crashes of energy that don't allow you to make it through a game. If you eat protein, good fats, and vegetables, your body will be a little bit more adept at burning fat naturally. It will be used to burning fat, and that will give you better stamina and mental focus in games. As far as things you would take or consume, I kind of get it, just that question has like, what is something I could take? For me, it's going to be more about hydration. And if you really feel like, I mean, most of the youth levels at this point, unless they're really young, we're not doing the banana snacks and stuff at halftime, things like that. Usually it's just going to be a hydration, maybe a Gatorade or something that's got a little bit of sugar in it, like coconut water, that type of thing. That would be something that might sharpen a person up a little bit, and it'll also enhance their hydration. So as far as anything else, like as far as a stimulant, things like that, I wouldn't push those, especially in the middle of a game, especially late in a game, due to the cardiovascular effects that can have, the heart effects.
Bree, I wanted to ask him one question here to end, and if he could go back to the hydration part. And there's a specific reason that we regimented even top-level soccer players, semi-pro, professional, is because even at that level, they're not usually disciplined enough to follow hydration regimen individually to the point that we're actually entering games hydrated. So can you give us a picture of what that looked like for our high-level soccer players? What was the regiment we had them maybe on a game day?
Yeah, so on game day, it was fairly similar to what we just mentioned here with the hydration regimen. But what I was asking them to do is in one of our last training sessions, 48 hours from a game, I would ask them to start consuming 1 to 2 liters in addition beyond their normal consumption, primarily of water or electrolyte solutions. So this is something that, if your urine is a little bit dark or things like that, you should be peeing every hour to every 2 hours during this 24 to 48 hour lead up. That tapers off on game day, and we try to get most of the hydration in the game day via electrolytes like Gatorade or like coconut water, things like that. We would do that and try to emphasize that about 4 hours prior to the game. But that's it's not in a gulping fashion. It's in a titrated fashion. And then during the match, again, like I mentioned, we would have, electrolyte solutions available. We would try to, anytime there was a break in action, even if we had to cause a break in action to make it happen, we would try to rehydrate the athletes because every little bit mattered. And then one thing that we were really big about, and we would try to have this ready after games, is as soon before these guys get in the shower, before we get on the bus for the 16-hour ride back from Mississippi to Corpus Christi, we would have them start hydrating. And, were these guys perfect? No, man, we would stop, and sometimes they would grab some of the big four and right at the convenience store after the game. They're not perfect, but the ones that I think were really serious about the highest level, they took this serious and they follow those hydration regimens before, during, and after that game. And I think there was times, I don't know, Sebastian, with the guys we coach, I know there was a time when we had a break where the guys, we kind of gave them a break and they kind of went, they went feral a little bit for a few days, and they did the beach thing, and maybe it was around spring break or something, but the guys kind of got loose and they were off their diets and off their regimens a little bit. We had a rough patch after that because guys came back not well hydrated, probably had some of the big four or lots of the big four that I mentioned, performance robbers, and they came back, not quite as sharp. And you could see it as coaches training high-level athletes every day. We could see that they weren't ready, and it took a week to get them back, whipped into shape and back hydrated and on track again. So interesting to see it at all levels, and I think it matters for youth athletes, just like we talked about, and it matters for the highest level in particular. And the difference between where you are right now and where those guys are and how you get there. Quite frankly, it's not just skills. It's not just what you do on the pitch. It's all these little things off the field. It's huge. I've seen it from my kids started at little peewee level, and my last one, finished in college playing, and again, as a runner, sprinter, middle distance sprinter, I can tell you what nutrition does to a runner. I can tell you what it does to an elite athlete. It's not helpful. And so I hope that answered your question.
Awesome. Thank you. If we have any other questions, feel free to just unmute yourself and go ahead and shoot them out. If not, give it just a second. Well, I think we're good. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in with us. Thank you, Dr. Curtis, for being here, and hopefully we can connect with you again and get you back on, and we appreciate all your insight and knowledge. If you guys do have any further questions or you want to reach back out, head to our website, sacitysc.com/club events, and you can find all his contact information there. And then if you'd like to rewatch this video or share it, it will be up on our YouTube and also linked on that same description for you. So thank you so much, Dr. Curtis. Thank you, Sebastian, everybody else for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your evening. We appreciate it.
All right, take care.
Thank you.